High schools always have their share of ghost stories. Some are harmless, silly tales made up to scare freshmen. Some carry a different weight, the kind of story that makes you uneasy even when you're just passing by the place where it supposedly happened. For us, that place was the girls' locker room. Everyone knew it was strange. The lights were old and buzzed constantly, flickering like a weak heartbeat. The showers leaked no matter how tightly the knobs were twisted, leaving a faint but endless dripping sound echoing through the tiled room. And the mirrors, especially the big one near the entrance hallways, felt like they held something just out of sight. Most people shrugged it off. Just an old part of the building, right? But the seniors whispered that there was more to it. They said years ago, before most of us were even born, a girl had collapsed in that very locker room after practice. She was found hours later, alone, cold, her eyes wide open. Nobody ever agreed on exactly how she died. Some said it was a health condition. Others claimed she slipped, hit her head, and drowned in the shower water. But the story everyone told was the same. Sometimes, late at night, she came back. Of course, no one really believed it until it happened to someone we knew. It was after volleyball practice one rainy evening. Everyone had already left, except for my teammate, Emily. She had realized she left her phone charger plugged in near the benches. Normally, she'll just wait until the next day. But she had a test to study for that night and didn't want to go home without it. She walked back into the locker room alone. The echo of her sneakers on the tile bounced off the walls, strangely louder than usual. She told me later that it felt like the air was heavier inside, like she'd stepped into a different building altogether as she went to grab her charger. She noticed something in one of the showers was running. She froze. No one should have been there. Everyone had already left. The curtain was pulled halfway shut, steam curling out into the air. Emily called out, "Hello? Coach?" No answer. She stepped closer, her heart pounding. She told herself maybe the water had been left on by accident, maybe a leaky pipe. She reached out, grabbed the curtain, and yanked it open. The water stopped instantly, just like that. 1 second it was rushing, the next it was dry. The floor wasn't even wet. The drain was bone dry, like the water hadn't existed at all. She stood there, frozen, the silence pressing in on her. And then every single locker door slammed shut at once. The sound was deafening, echoing off the walls. Emily dropped her charger and covered her ears. She swore it felt like the ground shook under her feet when she spun toward the exit. Her eyes caught something in the mirror. Someone was standing right behind her. She told me she couldn't breathe in that moment. The figure was tall, thin, with hair dripping wet, as if it had just stepped out of the shower. Its face was pale, almost gray, empty black hollows where its eyes should have been. But when she whipped around, no one was there. The room was empty. Her reflection, though, it was different. She was standing alone, but in the mirror, she swore the figure was still there, right over her shoulder, leaning closer. Its mouth was wide open, like it was screaming silently at her. She bolted. She didn't even bother grabbing her charger. She said the locker room door was harder to push open than it should have been, like something was pulling it shut from the other side. When she finally stumbled out into the hallway, the air felt light again, and the buzzing of the old lights sounded almost comforting compared to the silence she'd just left. Emily refused to go back in there alone after that. And the strangest part, the next day, when the janitor opened the locker room, he found something none of us could explain. On the mirror, the same one Emily had looked into, there were handprints. Not just one or two, but dozens of smeared, wet handprints, covering the glass from top to bottom. He cleaned them off, of course, but that night, they came back no one knows how to this day. If you walk into that locker room after practice, when everyone else has gone home, some people swear they can hear the faint drip of water, even when the showers are off. Others say if you look into the mirror long enough, you'll see her standing there, And if you're unlucky, she won't just stay in a reflection. High school routines are boringly predictable. Same teachers, same classrooms, same bells ringing day after day. That's why the smallest change, like a substitute teacher, always feels out of place. But what happened in my junior year was more than out of place. It was terrifying. It was a gray, rainy Tuesday morning. Our regular math teacher, Mr. Keller, had called in sick. We didn't care. Subs usually meant an easy day. But when we walked into the classroom, was already someone at the CHLKBOARD. At first, I thought maybe it was a guest speaker or a new staff member. But the moment I really looked at him, something in my stomach tightened. He was tall, too tall, almost. His suit was stiff, black, and looked 20 years out of date. His skin was pale, almost chalky under the fluorescent lights, and his hands looked bony with long fingers that gripped the chalk too tightly. He didn't greet us, didn't tell us his name, didn't even glance at us as we filed into our seats. He just kept writing, but what he was writing wasn't math. The board filled with strange symbols, curling spirals, and sharp, jagged marks didn't look like any numbers we'd ever seen. Some looked like letters, but from no language I knew. Others twisted into patterns that made my eyes ache if I looked too long. We all sat down quietly. Nobody dared talk. Even the loud kids, the ones who normally cracked jokes. The second a substitute walked in, cats stared. Finally, one kid near the front, Chris, cleared his throat. Sir, what's that supposed to be?" The man stopped writing. The chalk squeaked to a halt, and then he turned around. His eyes were wrong, too wide, too dark. They weren't the normal grayish blue you'd expect from someone pale like him. They were almost black, with just a tiny glimmer of light in the center, like pinpricks. He didn't blink as he looked at Chris. The whole room went still. The hum of the fluorescent lights was the only sound after what felt like forever. The substitute tilted his head slightly, as though he was studying us. He opened his mouth, but no words came out, just the faintest hiss of air, like a dry breath. Then he turned back and kept writing. We didn't ask again. 10 minutes passed in silence. The chalk scraped across the board, filling it with more and more of those marks. None of us wrote anything down. None of us moved, and then the classroom door opened. A man walked in, holding a slip of paper from the office. He looked flustered, apologizing for being late. He introduced himself as our substitute for the day. But here's the thing, the chalkboard was still full of symbols, but the tall man, gone, just gone. The real substitute blinked in confusion. What's all this?" he asked, pointing at the board. Nobody answered. Nobody could. He picked up the eraser and started wiping it clean, but he stopped almost immediately because the marks weren't coming off. They weren't chalk. They were carved into the board itself, etched deep into the surface. The janitor had to come with cleaning chemicals, scrubbing for almost an hour after class. But even when they finally managed to smooth it down, faint traces of the carvings were still there. That night, when the last janitor left, the board looked clean, empty. But the next morning, the symbols were back, faint, ghostly, as if they'd burned themselves into the slate. Day after day, teachers tried to erase them. Some succeeded for a little while, but they always returned, and then stranger things started happening. Students sitting in the back row would swear they saw the chalk move on its own, rolling across the tray as if an invisible hand had picked it up. Sometimes, in the middle of class, a faint scratching noise would echo from the board even when no one was near it. One girl, Rachel, said that during a test, she glanced up and saw the substitute, the tall, pale man standing right there, writing again. But when she blinked, he was gone, and the chalk was lying broken on the floor. The office tried to find out who he was. They checked the records, called the district, even looked through past substitute lists. But there was nothing. No name, no paperwork, no file. It was like he had never existed, but we all saw him. We all remembered the way his eyes scanned the room, the way the symbols seemed to twist under the light, the way the air felt colder when he was near. And sometimes, even years later, when I pass by that old classroom, I still feel it, the silence, the weight in the air, the faint scratching sound of chalk moving across a board. And if I dare to peek through the little window in the door, sometimes, just for a second, I see him standing there, writing. Every school has its secrets. An old classroom that's never used, a hallway that always feels colder than the rest, a locked room no one talks about. At my high school, it was the basement door. It sat tucked away near the cafeteria, almost hidden behind a soda machine that hummed day and night. Most students walked past without noticing, but if you slowed down, you'd see it. A rusted gray door with peeling paint and a heavy padlock keeping it shut. It wasn't marked. No sign, no label, nothing. Just a door to nowhere. When kids asked teachers about it, they always gave the same answer. It's storage. Nothing to worry about. But the students told a different story. The older ones whispered, the basement had been sealed off years ago after a flood ruined part of it. Others said it wasn't water. They said there had been an accident. Someone trapped down there. Someone who never came back. And even though most of us rolled our eyes at the rumors, we all noticed the same thing. The scratches, deep marks carved around the handle, as if something inside had been clawing to get out. For most, it was just another creepy school mystery. Until one night during a school dance, the gym was glowing with colored lights. The speakers blasting music so loud the walls shook. Everyone was dancing, laughing, buzzing with energy. But a group of kids, 5 juniors who always pushed boundaries, got bored. They wanted something more exciting than watching their classmates grind awkwardly under the disco lights. So one of them, Ryan, leaned in with a grin and said, "Let's check out the basement door." Half the group laughed, half groaned, but eventually they all agreed. They slipped out of the gym, down the dark hallways. The further they got from the music, the quieter everything felt. Their shoes echoed against the linoleum. Lockers stretched tall and shadowy along the walls. By the time they reached the cafeteria, their voices had dropped in nervous whispers. And there it was. The door got cold, gray, ordinary, except for the way the air seemed heavier near it. The hum of the vending machine sounded duller, muffled, like even sound avoided that spot. They stared for a long time. Bet it doesn't even open. One of them muttered. Then it happened. Bang. The sound hit like a hammer from behind the door, making all of them jump back. One of the girls yelped, clutching Ryan's arm. Holy crap. Did you hear that? They froze, waiting, then dashed another sound. Not a bang this time. A voice, muffled, low, but clear enough. Help me. The padlock rattled against the latch, the metal clinking softly like invisible hands were tugging from the other side. The kids' bravado cracked. 2 of them whispered frantically about leaving, but Ryan, trying to hide his shaking hands, stepped closer and pressed his ear against the cold metal dot. At first, nothing, just silence. Then whispers, dozens of them, overlapping, a chorus of voices pleading all at once. He couldn't make out the words, but the desperation in them was unmistakable. Ryan stumbled back, pale. We need to go," he stammered. That was all it took. They bolted, sneakers pounding the floor as they sprinted back toward the gym. None of them spoke until they were under the glow of the dance lights again, breathing hard, trying to convince themselves it was just pipes, just their imaginations. But deep down, they knew better. The next morning, curiosity got the better of them. They dragged a few more friends to the cafeteria, eager to prove what they'd seen. But when they turned the corner, their stomachs dropped. The door was gone. In its place was a smooth wall of gray concrete. The vending machine was flush against it now, humming like it had always been there. No padlock, no scratches, nothing. The kids panicked. They swore they hadn't imagined it. They argued in circles, voices rising. Finally, they spotted the janitor wheeling his mop bucket nearby and rushed over. There was a door here, Ryan insisted. Last night, we all saw it. We heard something inside. The janitor looked at the wall for a long moment. His expression was unreadable. Finally, he shook his head. There's never been a door there, he said softly, but his eyes told a different story. Over the next few weeks, the group tried to prove it. They asked older students. They checked yearbook photos of the cafeteria hallway. They even searched the school's old floor plans. Nothing. No one remembered a basement door. No picture showed it. It was like it had never existed at all. But the group swore they saw it. They swore they heard the voices. And late at night, the halls were empty. Others began to report strange things to Dot students passing the cafeteria, claimed they heard faint knocking. Sometimes a soft scrape, like fingernails against metal. Some even said they heard whispers drifting out of nowhere, and if you stood there long enough, listening, you might hear it too. A voice, broken, faint, begging, "Why did you leave me here?" And when you turn to look, there's nothing but smooth, cold concrete. There's something about high school buildings at night that makes them feel like entirely different places. During the day, the fluorescent lights, the echo of voices, and the steady rhythm of footsteps make the hallways feel alive. But at night, everything is stripped away. You're left with nothing but silence, shadows, and the unsettling sense that the walls themselves are holding secrets. That's what Emily discovered one fall evening after staying late for basketball practice. Her team had been preparing for an upcoming championship game, and practice ran longer than expected. By the time they wrapped up, most of the school was already empty. She slung her gym bag over her shoulder and started down the quiet corridor toward the locker room. At first, she wasn't bothered. She had walked these halls countless times before, but as she turned the corner, she noticed something strange. The lights in the girls' locker room were still flickering. That locker room had always been old, one of the few parts of the school that hadn't been renovated. The tiles were cracked, the lockers dented, and the overhead lights buzzed faintly. Still, the light tonight wasn't just buzzing. It was strobing, flickering, like a dying candle. Emily pushed open the door, and the smell hit her first, damp, metallic, and almost moldy. The air was heavy, like the place hadn't been aired out in years. Even though they had been using it earlier that day, she walked inside slowly, the door creaking as it shut behind her. Rows of lockers stretched out in front of her, their doors slightly ajar, as if someone had gone through them one by one. Emily froze. She knew no one else had been in there since practice ended. "Hello?" she called out, her voice bouncing unnaturally off the tiled walls. "Coach." Silence. The only response was the faint drip of water coming from the far end of the room where the showers were. Her footsteps echoed as she made her way toward her locker. She kept her eyes focused forward, not wanting to glance into the dark cracks between the slightly open locker doors. Something about them made her skin crawl. When she finally reached her locker, she noticed something odd. A faint smear of dirt tore, maybe ash streaked across the door. She frowned, reaching out to wipe it off. That's when she heard it. A whisper. Not loud, not clear, but definitely. There, it came from behind her. Emily spun around, heart pounding. The locker room was empty. The strobing light overhead made the shadows move across the walls, tricking her eyes into thinking something was shifting just out of sight. She swallowed hard and turned back to her locker, quickly spinning the combination. She just needed to grab her bag and get out. When she opened the locker, her stomach dropped. Her bag was gone. Instead, sitting neatly on the top shelf was an old, yellowed photograph. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. It showed a group of students, maybe from the 70s, lined up in front of the school gym. Their uniforms were outdated, their hairstyles old-fashioned. But what made Emily's blood run cold was the face of one of the girls in the picture. It looked exactly like her. Same eyes, same smile, same hair tied up in the same way she always wore it for practice. She dropped the photo, backing away quickly. Her breath came out in shallow gasps as she turned toward the showers, where the dripping sound had grown louder. That's when she saw it. A figure standing at the far end of the room. It was a girl, maybe her age, but her clothes were soaked, her skin pale, and her hair hung in dripping strands across her face. She stood completely still, except for her head, which tilted unnaturally to the side, as if it had been broken. Emily couldn't move. Every part of her screamed to run, but her legs felt glued to the ground. The girl raised her hand slowly and pointed directly at Emily Dutt. And then, all at once, the lockers slammed shut around her. One by one, the sound exploding through the room like gunshots. Emily snapped out of her paralysis, bolting for the door. She yanked it open and stumbled into the hallway, slamming it shut behind her. But the sound didn't stop. Even from outside, she could hear the faint metallic creak of locker doors swinging open again, and a whisper, just barely audible, calling her name. She didn't stop running until she was out of the building and in the safety of the parking lot lights. The next day, she came back with her friends, determined to prove to herself that it was all in her head. They opened her locker, and her bag was sitting there, exactly where she had left it. No dirt, no ash, no photograph. But when she passed the trophy case outside the gym, her heart froze, because behind the glass, among the old black and white photos of past teams, there it was, the same group picture she had seen in her locker. And the girl in the photo, the one who looked just like her, was still smiling back. High school students always joked about the teachers who came and went. Some substitutes were kind, others strict, and some barely paid attention at all. But everyone remembered the night classes began with Ms. Harper. She wasn't like any other substitute they had ever met. It all started in late October, right before Halloween, when their history teacher, Mr. Langley, suddenly went on leave. No one knew why he simply stopped showing up, and the school announced they'd be getting a long-term substitute to cover his classes. When Miss Harper walked in, the room fell silent. She was tall, almost too tall, with pale skin that looked stretched tight over her cheekbones. Her eyes were sharp and cold, like they were always studying something no one else could see. Her voice was low, steady, and carried a weight that made even the most disruptive students sit up straighter. At first, she seemed strict but normal. She called roll, handed out worksheets, and lectured in a monotone voice about obscure events that weren't even in the textbook. But as the days went on, the class started to notice little things, details that didn't feel right, like the way she never seemed to blink dot, or how the room felt colder whenever she entered, or the strange symbols she would sometimes write on the board, erasing them quickly if anyone asked what they meant. One night, after basketball practice, a small group of students stayed behind in the history classroom to work on a project. Among them was Jacob, who always liked to joke around, but also had a bad habit of snooping. He found a leather-bound notebook tucked beneath Ms. Harper's desk. It was old, the pages yellowed and fragile, covered in handwriting none of them could read, but the drawings were clear enough. Twisted figures, dark shapes, and diagrams of classrooms that looked just like theirs in one of the sketches. The students noticed something chilling. The room was filled with rows of desks, but every desk had a student slumped over it, their faces buried in their arms, and standing at the front, towering over them, was Miss Harper. Her smile in the drawing was sharp and unnatural, stretching far wider than any human smile should. Jacob quickly shoved the book back under the desk. He laughed it off, trying to keep the mood light. But everyone left that night with an uneasiness they couldn't shake. The next morning, Miss Harper's lesson was different. She didn't use the textbook. Instead, she handed out sheets of paper with strange questions, things no one understood. "Translate this passage," she said flatly, pointing at lines of text that looked like gibberish jagged letters and swirling curves. "It is important that you get it right." One student raised his hand, confused. "What language is this?" Her eyes flicked to him, unblinking. "Older than you can imagine," she whispered. From that day on, students began dreading her class, not because of the workload, but because of the way they started feeling inside the room. Some described it as being watched. Others said they would zone out, only to realize entire hours had passed without remembering anything. Jacob, though, felt it the worst. Every night after her class, he began dreaming of the notebook. The drawings would crawl across his mind, the inked figures shifting and moving when they shouldn't. One night, he dreamt of Miss Harper standing over his bed. He woke up sweating, convinced it was only a nightmare. But the next day at school, when he walked into class, she looked directly at him and said softly, "Did you sleep well?" That was when Jacob knew something wasn't right. By the second week, more students stopped showing up to history class. Some claimed they were sick, others skipped altogether. But the ones who stayed started looking pale, tired, like something was draining them. And then came the night it all broke. Open, Jacob and his friends decided to stay after school again, determined to find out what Ms. Harper was really hiding. They crept back into the history room and found her notebook again. But this time, when they opened it, the pages weren't drawings anymore. They were names. The names of every single student in the class routine neatly, one by one, and next to some of the names were dates. Jacob's name was there. His date was tomorrow. The group panicked, but before they could react, the classroom door creaked open. Ms. Harper stood in the doorway. Her eyes gleamed in the dark, reflecting the faint light like an animal's. "You weren't supposed to see that," she said softly. Her voice wasn't monotone anymore. It carried something deeper, something hungry. The lights flickered, and suddenly the room shifted. The desks stretched farther away. The walls seemed to bend, and the air turned heavy. The students tried to run, but their legs felt like they were moving through water mist. Harper's smile widened, too wide, stretching inhumanly across her face. "You're mine now?" she whispered. Jacob grabbed the notebook, clutching it to his chest. Without thinking, he tore out the page with his name on it and ripped it to shreds. The room snapped back instantly, the lights buzzing to life. The desks returning to normal. When they looked up, Miss Harper was gone. The door stood open, swaying slightly, as if she had never been there at all. The next day, a new announcement came over the intercom. "Students, please note, Miss Harper will not be returning. Mr. Langley will resume his classes next week." No one ever saw her again. But Jacob kept a notebook, and sometimes, late at night, he swears he can hear pages turning on their own.